The Velari remembered their homeworld only in songs. For 20 millennia they had sung of azure skies, gentle rains, and fertile plains where their ancestors once danced beneath twin moons. Their archives described a paradise, carefully curated records of biodiversity preserved in crystalline memory orbs, but no Velari living had set foot on that soil. War long ago had driven them into exile among the stars. They had sworn never again to taint themselves with violence, and over time their culture perfected the art of peace. Their weapons were dismantled. Their soldiers turned into mediators, their instincts softened by centuries of orbital sanctuaries. So when at last the council decreed it was time to reclaim the mother world, the Velari expected to descend into Eden. What awaited them instead was terror. Predators ruled the wilds, not simple beasts, not mere hunters, but scaled titans armored with bone-like living fortresses. They shredded drones, ignored energy barriers, and shrugged off sonic deterrents. Entire reclamation teams were torn apart in minutes. The Velari, for all their technology, for all their elegance, discovered they had no defense against raw survival. Now they huddled in silver camps, afraid to step beyond their shielded walls, and sent desperate calls into the void for help. Only one species answered: humans. The Compact considered them reckless, undisciplined, uncivilized by most standards. But the Velari were desperate, and desperation leaves little room for dignity. Commander Velon waited in the clearing, surrounded by 9 of his finest honor guard. Each stood in flawless symmetry, their translucent skin glowing faintly in the sun, veins visible beneath like liquid light. To Velari eyes they embodied perfection, tall, elongated, serene, their every movement harmonized with subtle gestures of etiquette. When the human ship roared through the atmosphere, it looked like catastrophe in progress. Its descent was not graceful. It was violent, tearing the sky, burning the air, slamming into the ground with a quake that made trees shudder. Dust and leaves spiraled in a choking storm. Velon suppressed a ripple of revulsion. What kind of pilot could mistake grace for such crude force? The ramp hissed open. 3 figures emerged. The Velari instinctively drew back. Hair everywhere. Thick tufts erupting from jaws, from scalps, from arms. Shaggy, wild, uncontrolled. Their eyes gleamed with unsettling brightness. Predatory and alive in a way no Velari could tolerate. The lead human grinned, a bizarre baring of teeth that felt like a threat. He strode forward, extending a hand as if to strike. "Captain Mason," he said, voice rough, coarse, unmodulated. "This is Riley, that's Dana. We hear you've got a predator." "Problem," Velon froze. No ceremonial introduction. No generational markers. Just crude sound tags, names. His guard rippled in synchronized discomfort. But the humans seemed oblivious. They stood casually, hands on hips, eyes scanning the forest, not like explorers but like hunters scenting prey. The Velari began their explanation carefully, framing it within proper cultural context. They spoke of population losses, of ecological imbalance, of the sanctity of life that forbade them from using true violence. They showed hollow projections of predator attacks, recordings of shredded drones, casualty reports written in tones of sorrow. Mason cut them off mid-sentence. Yeah, numbers later. What are you using to fight these things?" One soldier stepped forward, proud to demonstrate their most advanced defensive tool, the Rod of Harmony. Sleek silver, a meter long, it emitted calibrated sonic pulses meant to overwhelm nervous systems, ending conflict without permanent injury. Mason took it, examined it, turned it off, then raised an eyebrow. "You're trying to fight apex predators with a glow stick?" Riley snorted. Dana laughed outright. The Velari stiffened. Harmony weapons had preserved peace for thousands of years. How dare these primitives mock them? "It is sufficient," Velon said, though his voice quivered with doubt. Mason tossed the rod back carelessly. "No wonder you're getting eaten alive." Without waiting for permission, the humans began marching into the forest, weapons strapped across their backs, crude devices of metal and fire. Velon tried to protest, to warn them of contamination protocols, of tactical procedure, but Mason waved him off. "Relax, we'll handle it." And just like that, the humans vanished into the jungle, leaving the Velari standing in perfect formation, trembling with a fear they could not yet name. The waiting was unbearable. Velari culture had trained them to value patience, to move in rhythms as predictable as song, but there was nothing harmonious in this silence. Hours crawled past. From the jungle came sounds that made their translucent skin crawl. Low growls reverberated like thunder trapped underground. Then came the crashing of trees, the shrieks of predators in rage or pain, and, most terrifying of all, booming cracks like sky fire splitting the heavens. The honor guard stood frozen, unable to interpret the chaos. Valen's mind raced with calculations. Surely the humans had perished. They lacked protective barriers. They ignored purification procedures. They carried primitive devices that expelled chemical fire. Against the armored titans, what chance did they have? Valen rehearsed the apology he would deliver to the council. He imagined their voices. You entrusted primitives with the reclamation of our sacred home. You let barbarians bleed on Velari soil. The shame would stain his line for generations. Yet as twilight fell and the jungle quieted, no human corpses emerged. Instead, distant laughter rippled through the trees. Harsh, undisciplined, full of life, it carried with it something that chilled the Velari more than any predator's roar. Defiance. When the humans finally returned, the Velari prepared themselves for grief. What entered the clearing instead left them speechless. 3 predators lay dragged behind the humans, massive carcasses still steaming. Their scales split open by violence no Velari weapon could have managed. Mason carried a jagged claw over his shoulder as if it were a trophy. Riley staggered beneath the weight of a severed head, grinning as though exhaustion was triumph. Dana had already slung strips of bloody meat across her pack, humming tunelessly. The Velari recoiled in synchronized horror, their skin flushing pale. Valen's throat vibrated in disbelief. You killed them? Mason smirked, dropping the claw with a thud. That's usually how hunting works. But such destruction, without study, without restraint, Valen's voice cracked. The compact's strictures on ecological balance, on controlled intervention, on reverence for life, were all violated in these bloody trophies. Dana ripped a strip of meat from her pack, shoved it into her mouth, and chewed noisily. Riley sparked a fire from metal and stone, a ritual so primitive it felt like blasphemy. The Velari drew back, voices overlapping in frantic harmonies of alarm. Mason ignored them all, crouched by the flames, and began butchering a predator with calm efficiency. By nightfall, the clearing glowed with human firelight. The predator's flesh crackled and hissed over open flames, releasing a greasy smoke that clung to every breath. The Velari gagged, their throats vibrating in waves of revulsion. For them, consumption was ritual, sterile, purified, nutrients reduced to crystalline rations swallowed without texture or taste. To devour raw flesh like this, without analysis, without filters, was unthinkable. Yet the humans ate with gusto. Mason tore chunks free with his teeth, grease running down his beard. Dana licked her fingers clean, unconcerned. Riley cracked a bone against a rock and sucked at the marrow like it was nectar. Valen nearly collapsed, overwhelmed by the dissonance. You're consuming them? Without purification protocols? Without knowing what toxins? What contagions? Mason shrugged, speaking around a mouthful. Then we die. But until then, we eat. The casual acceptance of mortality struck Valen harder than any predator's claw. His people lived in fear of contamination, of imbalance, of pain itself. They built walls around their lives to keep death away. But these humans, they welcomed risk, embraced danger, laughed in the face of uncertainty. The predators that had ruled Velari soil for millennia had been reduced to meat on a stick. And for the first time, Valen realized the truth. The humans were more terrifying than the monsters. That night, Valen could not sleep. He sat apart, staring at the fire where the humans laughed and ate, their faces lit with flickering orange glow, their bodies scarred and alive. He thought of his people's sterile cities in orbit, where no blade had been drawn in 10,000 years, where no life was taken without sterilization, where every risk was calculated into nothingness. The Velari had built a civilization without predators, without fear, without pain. But watching the humans, Valen realized something terrible. In purging themselves of violence, the Velari had also purged resilience. They had forgotten hunger and so had forgotten strength. They had erased pain and so had erased endurance. They had banished predators and so had forgotten how to be prey and how to resist it. The predators of the homeworld were not their true enemy. Time was, evolution was, the universe was, and only species like the humans, who stared into the maw of death and laughed, could survive it. The thought curdled in his chest like poison. For the first time in centuries, a Velari felt something they had no word for. Not fear, not revulsion, admiration. And it terrified him most of all. As the day unfolded, the humans pressed deeper into the jungle. dragging the Velari reluctantly with them. Every step was chaos. Vines clung, insects swarmed, and distant roars echoed like storms. The Velari moved in perfect symmetry, scanning with delicate sensors, cataloging threats with clinical precision. The humans trampled forward with little care, hacking at vines, swatting at insects, joking about bites and stings. To the Velari, each brush of contact was contamination. To the humans, it was life. When a smaller predator lunged from the undergrowth, a scaled beast no larger than a man, the Velari shrieked in harmonized panic. Their rods of harmony pulsed uselessly, sound waves scattering birds but leaving the predator unfazed. Mason moved faster than thought. A blade flashed, blood sprayed, and the creature collapsed, twitching at his feet. Dana grinned. Lunch already? Riley knelt, examining the carcass, then casually tossed it over his shoulder. The Velari stood frozen, horrified at the ease of violence, the casual disposal of life. Valan's throat ached with unspoken fear. To the humans, predators were obstacles. To the Velari, they were existential terrors. Yet somehow the humans made survival look like instinct. For the first time, Valan wondered if the Velari's devotion to peace had not elevated them but crippled them. By the second night, the contrast had become unbearable. The Velari camped in tight formation, sterilizing every surface, scanning every particle of air. The humans sat apart, basking in the heat of another predator roasting over open flame, telling stories punctuated by laughter. Their language was coarse, their gestures crude, but their energy filled the clearing with a vitality that made the Velari seem ghost-like in comparison. Valan studied them, fascinated despite himself. The humans bled from scratches and bites, yet treated wounds as inconveniences, binding them with strips of cloth torn from their own garments. The Velari would have quarantined such injuries, flooded them with antiseptic fields, declared them medical emergencies. But Mason only flexed his hand and muttered, "Hurts like hell," before returning to carving meat. Dana offered him a strip, and he ate it without hesitation. Valan realized with a shudder that pain, risk, and hunger were not things the humans fled from. They embraced them. They had grown within them. Where the Velari built walls of safety, the humans had built resilience. And resilience, Valan realized, was a weapon far sharper than any rod of harmony. Watching them laugh beneath firelight, mouths stained with blood and grease, he began to understand why predators had fallen before them. It wasn't just tools. It was will. On the third day, the jungle tested them with fury. The ground shook beneath the tread of something vast, trees splintering like matchsticks. The Velari froze in terror, their formation breaking instinctively. Through the foliage burst a nightmare. A predator larger than any record, 6 meters tall, armored in scales like obsidian plates, its maw lined with jagged teeth that glistened with blood. Its roar made the air vibrate, harmonizing cruelly with the Velari's own trembling bodies. They tried their rods, sending waves of sonic pulses, but the monster ignored them completely, charging forward with a speed that shattered reason. Valan's mind screamed to run, to abandon the mission, to retreat into sterile safety. But the humans moved differently. Mason dropped to one knee, rifle raised, barking orders in clipped words the Velari couldn't even process. Riley dashed to one flank, Dana to the other, their movements uncoordinated by Velari standards, yet terrifyingly effective. Gunfire cracked, explosions burst, blades gleamed. The predator shrieked, thrashing as blood sprayed in arcs across the clearing. Mason leapt forward, driving a blade into its eye with brutal precision. Dana hurled an explosive charge beneath its chest. Riley fired round after round into the gaps revealed. The beast collapsed with an earth-shaking crash. Silence followed, broken only by the human's ragged laughter. Valan fell to his knees, overwhelmed. The predators that had haunted his people for centuries had fallen in minutes, and the Velari had contributed nothing. The aftermath was worse than the battle. Blood soaked the soil, thick and pungent. The Velari recoiled, activating purifiers, scrubbing the air in panicked waves. But the humans only cheered, whooping with savage joy. Mason yanked his blade free, wiping gore across his arm without flinching. Dana climbed atop the fallen predator, raising a strip of meat she had carved free, triumphant. Riley slumped against the corpse, laughing until tears streaked down his dirt-stained face. To them it wasn't trauma. It was victory. To the Velari it was madness. Valan forced his throat to vibrate words, struggling to keep composure. You risk contamination, infection, imbalance. These actions, this butchery, are not sustainable. Mason met his gaze, eyes blazing. Sustainable? Commander, you're dying behind walls while these things eat your planet. That's not balance. That's surrender. He tore into a slab of predator meat raw, veins standing out in his neck as he chewed. Dana and Riley followed suit, sharing the grotesque feast without hesitation. The Velari staggered back, voices rising in a panicked harmony that bordered on a scream. They had called humans for salvation, but what they had invited onto their soil was something far more primal. Not saviors, not allies, but predators in their own right. That night Valen could not sleep. He sat apart, staring at the fire where the humans laughed and ate, their faces lit with flickering orange glow, their bodies scarred and alive. He thought of his people's sterile cities in orbit, where no blade had been drawn in 10,000 years, where no life was taken without sterilization, where every risk was calculated into nothingness. The Velari had built a civilization without predators, without fear, without pain. But watching the humans, Valen realized something terrible. In purging themselves of violence, the Velari had also purged resilience. They had forgotten hunger and so had forgotten strength. They had erased pain and so had erased endurance. They had banished predators and so had forgotten how to be prey and how to resist it. The predators of the homeworld were not their true enemy. Time was, evolution was, the universe was, and only species like the humans, who stared into the maw of death and laughed, could survive it. The thought curdled in his chest like poison. For the first time in centuries, a Velari felt something they had no word for. Not fear, not revulsion, admiration. And it terrified him most of all. The next morning brought no peace. The jungle was restless, creatures skittering in silence, as though the world itself was waiting. The Velari scouts reported movement, multiple predators, converging with unnatural coordination. It was as if the death of the great beast had summoned an army in vengeance. Valen felt panic stir in the Velari ranks, their voices breaking into discordant pitches. Retreat was their instinct, to flee back into orbit where sterility meant safety. But Mason's jaw tightened as he studied the readings. They're coming for us, good. Let's give them a welcome. Dana smirked, checking her explosives. Riley cracked his knuckles with grim excitement. Valen couldn't comprehend it. You invite death? He demanded. Mason looked at him, eyes blazing with the kind of fire that had not burned in Velari for millennia. No. We meet it head on. That's how you remind the universe you exist. The words struck deeper than any weapon. When the predators emerged, dozens of them, eyes glowing in the underbrush, the Velari trembled. But the humans surged forward. Guns thundered, blades flashed. Fire erupted as explosives tore the ground apart. The predators howled, charging in waves. The Velari froze, unable to move. And then Valen, in a moment of desperation, raised his sonic rod, not in defense, but in resonance with the humans' chaos. For the first time, he fought not to balance but to break. The battle was unlike anything the Velari had ever witnessed. Humans fought like storms, not soldiers. Mason wrestled a predator twice his size, slamming his blade into its chest until it collapsed. Dana darted between shadows, planting charges that sent shockwaves through trees, shredding claws and bone alike. Riley bled from a deep gash across his arm, yet grinned through it, hurling fire into snapping jaws until the monster fell. The predators did not relent, but neither did the humans. Each blow they took became fuel, each wound a spark of fury. Their laughter cut through the Velari's despair, an anthem of defiance that infected even alien throats. Valen screamed, not a song of harmony, but a raw, primal sound that joined the humans' chaos. His sonic rod shattered the skull of a predator. Other Velari, trembling at first, followed, striking out clumsily but with intent. The predators began to falter, their endless momentum broken against a wall of madness and steel. Hours later, when silence finally fell, the battlefield was littered with corpses. The Velari stood stunned, coated in gore, shaking from exhaustion and disbelief. The humans sat among the bodies, breathing hard, eyes still burning with undiminished fire. They looked like survivors. They looked like conquerors. They looked in a way Valen hated to admit, like the future. That night, beneath a shattered canopy where stars pierced the smoke, Valen sat apart once more. His hands shook, sticky with predator blood. For the first time he had killed. The sensation lingered like a toxin, but also like a truth long denied. Across the fire, the humans drank, laughed, and planned their next hunt as if nothing had happened. Mason noticed his stare and tilted his head. You're quiet, Commander. Valen's voice trembled. We have spent centuries removing violence from our essence. We believed it was the highest form of civilization. But perhaps it was surrender. Mason's lips curled into a grim smile. Peace isn't the absence of violence. It's surviving it. Dana raised her cup. Riley laughed through his bandages, and the flames roared higher. Velan realized then what terrified him most. The Velari could not unlearn their sterilized ways. They would never become what the humans were. And so, for the first time, he truly understood why his people had summoned them. The Velari had not called humans to save their world. They had called predators to remind them what survival looked like. The fire crackled, the jungle whispered, and above them the stars looked on, witnesses to the truth that would echo for millennia. Humanity was not the galaxy's greatest monster. Humanity was its last hope.